SuperTalk TV, SuperTalk.fm, of course, on your SuperTalk stations all across the state of Mississippi. All guests appear on the Farm Bureau phone line. Check out favorites.com and go with the home team, Mississippi Farm Bureau. Ben Ingram joins us from New York City. Big series for the Braves with the Mets. And I am curious as we begin. Thanks, as always, for your time. Does it have a little bit different feel when you're in New York?
Oh, yeah, every time. This is a divisional rival. I think that's a big part of it, too. But when you come here, their expectations are really high every year. So last few years, the Braves have been the top team in the division. So they want to take out the Braves. They've spent a lot of money. They've added to their payroll and their roster. And I think they've put their crosshairs on the Braves. And that really amps up the rivalry. And then you add into the fact that we're in New York City, and this is such a big baseball town. I think it's great every time we come here. We were here in May, and that still felt like a huge series. But last night was probably the biggest crowd I've seen at Citi Field for a Braves-Mets game in a while. I think a big part of that was because it's going into the weekend. I think when we were here last, it was in the middle of the week. But it really does. It ratchets it up. And somebody asked me the other day, they said, if you could have your dream matchup for a World Series, what would it be? I said, us and the Yankees. I mean, World Series in New York, how could you top that? Now, I don't want to take anything away from what happened last year, because you win a World Series, it could be on the moon for all I care, and it's still going to be a thrill, but that would be hard to beat.
Citi Field's a great ballpark, too. I've only been there for one time, or been there once. I don't love New Yankee Stadium. I feel like they lost so much in the transition from the old ballpark to the new ballpark, but I went to a Yankees-Mets game one time at Citi Field, and it's out there a little bit. I mean, it doesn't have that vibe of, like a Petco in San Diego where it's in the middle of downtown. I mean, you kind of got to go out to get to it. But once you're in the ballpark, that's a great spot for a game.
It is. And I think that's really the only complaint about coming to New York from our traveling party is we stay in Manhattan. So getting to and from the ballpark is tough. I mean, we usually take the bus out there, and it's anywhere from a 40-minute bus ride to an hour, sometimes longer. It took us about 50 minutes to get there yesterday. But after the game, for us, instead of waiting on the bus to come back to the hotel, we jump on the 7 train and ride with the masses on the 7 Express back into Manhattan. And that's an experience.
It is.
But it's a fun experience, especially tangling with Mets fans. They see our badges. They see who we are. We have a good time with it. And it was fun. The last time we were here, Chip was showing everybody his World Series ring. And it's just fun. It's just people who love the game and love the rivalry. And it's definitely out there, but a good ballpark.
Ben, it's funny. So when I went to that game, we took the train from Manhattan to the ballpark. And then so my father-in-law went, and my mother-in-law and Jane, and our oldest daughter at the time was 2 or 3, and our son was 6 months old. And so that was our traveling party on the train out to they ended up getting a car back to town, and I think I took the train back to the city after, and it just felt like it may be a little safer alternative. But you're right. I mean, that's an experience, and people are so excited because everybody that's on that, generally speaking, is going to the ballgame.
Yeah, they are. And I love that. I think that's what makes this rivalry so good. I think through the years, there have been times where the Braves would have considered the Phillies their top rival in the division, or the Nationals, just depending on who was good. For me, everybody in your division is a rival, but this is my favorite rivalry, Braves and Mets, that we tangle with. It's been really fun. The two fan bases, for the most part, two very different types of people, and I think that adds to it. You have the slower Southern style down in Atlanta, and you come up here, and it's a completely different mindset and a completely different lifestyle altogether. But I find that fun. I think that deep down, both fan bases would admit this is the peak rivalry for them. Obviously, you want to beat the Phillies and the Nationals and the Marlins, and of course the Mets would say that the Yankees are a big rival as well. But for me, this is such a great rivalry, and I love being in the middle of it. And that's my favorite thing of coming up here. Our booth, Richard, here at Citi Field, it's right there above where people are walking. I mean, you can make eye contact 10 feet away from people walking right by you. And occasionally they'll holler something up at you that you might not want on the air. But I think that adds to the spiciness of the rivalry. I love this Mets-Braves rivalry, and especially when we come up here.
All right, if Braves-Mets was a college football rivalry, what two teams would it be?
That's a great question. I guess if you're you're talking about peak rivalry would be Auburn, Alabama. I'd say right under that, maybe. Maybe it's LSU, Alabama. Maybe it's Georgia, Florida, something like that. I guess what I mean by that is when you think of major league rivalries, you think Yankees and Red Sox, you think Giants and Dodgers, you might think Cubs and Cardinals. Those are probably the three more elite rivalries across Major League Baseball. Maybe one step back from that, folks would say, oh, maybe Braves and Mets. So maybe that's the best comparison I could draw.
That's fair. It certainly is going to be a great atmosphere all weekend and a big series and commitment on both sides, right? So the Mets have spent a ton of money and they've gotten Jacob deGrom back. How much does that change things? And I know we've only seen him once. He was really, really good in one outing. Will we see him this weekend?
Yeah, he's going Sunday.
Sunday. Okay.
Against Spencer Strider. So we're expecting about 1 million strikeouts on Sunday with Strider, deGrom. But yeah, I think it definitely adds juice to what's already going to be a great series. Whether Jacob deGrom is Jacob deGrom or not, the fact of the matter is he's on the mound. So therefore, you know what he's capable of. We'll get a matchup on Saturday. We've got a doubleheader tomorrow, and we don't know the matchups yet. We do know that the Braves will send out Odorizzi and Fried. I know that in one of those ball games, Max Scherzer will go for the Mets. I'm hoping for a Max Fried, Max Scherzer matchup just because you like those matchups. And I guess getting back to your question, that really adds a ton of juice into what is already a good series when you have your best and their best. You go into the series, and if deGrom wasn't healthy or if you missed Scherzer, you'd say, oh, you caught a break. But for me personally, deep down, I want to see those guys in there because I think it adds so much to the overall aura of what this series can be. It's our best and your best. And I think that really adds to it. So you want to beat them at their best, and I think you want to send a message, and no greater way to send a message than to beat one of their top pitchers.
And in terms of commitment on the Braves side, you get the news earlier this week where Austin Riley has extended 10 years, $212.5 million. I don't think he's going to have to do any soup kitchen lines anytime soon. So there are layers to that, right? So let's start with the deal itself. A lot of people that looked at that and go, it's a team-friendly deal. And I think in a lot of ways it is. We were talking about it earlier this week, and Borky goes, if he goes to the open market, he probably can get more money than he got. But there's also the security and I'm comfortable. I'm in a place I like. I love the teammates and the pieces that are around me. And, oh, by the way, it's still $200 million.
It's so perfect, I feel. I don't think he wants to go anywhere else. He's perfect for the Atlanta Braves. You have him here for 10 years, and you don't have a problem giving out a long-term deal like that when you're talking about the player being 25 years old.
Right.
I think where teams get into trouble is when they're giving 31, 32-year-old guys 10, 12, 13-year deals. For the Braves, this makes total sense. He's the kind of guy that you want to be the next guy in line. You go from Chipper to Freddie. Austin is a very natural next guy in that list of guys. And I think furthermore, you look through the rest of your infield and you see that you have your first baseman locked up and your second baseman locked up. Hopefully the same with your shortstop at the end of the season with Dansby. Yeah. And these are all very young guys who you'd like to be here for a long time. I think about the month that Austin just had. I mean, he has a baby in the first week of the month. He's an all-star. He set a franchise record for extra base hits in a month, passing, oh, by the way, Hank Aaron. He's an all-star for the first time, and then he gets the contract extension. It's just an amazing month, and a guy that is the same now as he was a year ago, 2 years ago. I don't think money's going to inflate his head. I don't think his success is going to inflate that sense of self-worth either. He's a very humble guy. He's the kind of guy that you want to give that kind of money to, and you want him to be here for a long time.
Is there a possibility, and maybe I'm reading too much into this, but is there anything where Austin may have looked at Freddie and the fact that he left and maybe some of the drama that went with that, and even if you don't believe all of it, seeing how touched Freddie was when he came back to Atlanta for that series where he said, you know what, I've got it really good and I don't want to do that.
I would imagine it's an eye-opener. I mean, you learn a lot from that because for Austin, he's been here for a little while, but I don't think he or anybody else on this ball club has really seen anything quite like that. I don't think any of us expected anything quite like what happened with Freddie. Everything that happened was the opposite of what you expected to happen. I think even more so, not just for Austin, I think for the team, probably an eye-opener. not that it was the team's fault that Freddie ended up signing with the Dodgers, but you don't want to go through back-to-back off seasons of losing some of your big names. And obviously you weren't going to be losing Austin. He was still controllable for the next few seasons. But I think it's a major step forward to say, this is one of our guys. We're going to make sure he's here. I think they'd say the same thing for Dansby Swanson, especially with the season that Dansby's having. He's having a terrific year. And I don't think you want to go through back-to-back off seasons of losing one of the faces of your franchise. There's lots of blame to pass around for what happened with Freddie. I think most of that is on Freddie's representation and some on Freddie himself. I think if Freddie could go back and do the whole thing over again, it'd go completely different. We saw him fire his representation, and that's a big shot in my mind. I think that tells a big part of the story. So I think everybody watched from the sidelines, the team, Austin, et cetera, and learn, okay, how can I do this differently for my case?
More coming up with Ben. New York as the series with the Mets this weekend rolls on. Appreciate, as always, Ben, your insight and your time. I just, as we wrap up, you put the picture on Instagram earlier this week with you and Vin Scully. You're a kind of like me, a radio nerd, and have been for a long time, but also understand the business. Let's start by just tell me a little bit about your relationship, as whatever it was, with arguably the greatest to ever do it.
I think he is the greatest. He's certainly the most unique. I think when it comes to his overall IQ, not just his baseball IQ, he was so incredibly special. I got to meet him 2 times. As you know, for years we had Don Sutton in our radio booth. And in the 2013 postseason, that's when I met Ben for the first time. And I was able to do so because of Don and all his years with the Dodgers. Yeah. And he took me down to their booth. And he was there calling the games for the Dodgers for the NLDS. It was Braves and Dodgers that year. And I got to spend about 5 minutes with him. And it felt like, I don't want to say it felt like meeting the Lord, but it almost felt like meeting somebody that's like one of God's right-hand men, if that makes any sense. Yeah. Just such a special human. You felt like you met someone that was almost angelic. And I don't want to be over the top, but he just had that kind of sense to him, an ability to make you feel special. And he's coming from a place where he's of such hierarchy in Major League Baseball, simply because of nothing else, is linked to the past. I mean, this is a guy who called Jackie Robinson's games. This is a guy who, when he was, he told me when he was, I think, 8 or 9 years old, get to meet Babe Ruth at the Polo Grounds. And you have to have a link like that, to names like that. He called games at Ebbets Field. He called games with a Mississippian in Red Barber, who I think is one of the greatest pioneers for our industry and what we do, especially in Major League Baseball. And that's, I couldn't wrap my mind around the link that he was to so many, and his depth of baseball knowledge. He had so much just rolling around in his head of things that would just blow our minds because he'd been around that long. His longevity is something that's just fascinating to me. If you get to call games in the big leagues for 25 years, that's a remarkable feat. He did it for 67 years with one team. I don't know how you top that. I hope I live 67 years. So in so many ways, he was amazing. He always had the right thing to say. He always knew when not to say anything. And he got to witness some of the greatest moments in the history of our game. And just the few times that I met him, he remembered my name after the first time that I met him. That blew me away. And he still, he signed a note for me that I still have in my office at home that is framed, and I'll cherish that for as long as I'm around.
Of all people, I was reading a guest column that Keith Olbermann wrote in GQ a few years ago. And it wasn't necessarily the most flattering piece, but in like the way that Keith Olbermann does, it was kind of flattering. And I'm going to not get the numbers exactly right, but ballpark, there had been 94 World Series or 92 at the time that he wrote it. And Vin Scully had been on the mic either as a team announcer, a national radio announcer, or a national television announcer for like 64 of the 92 World Series. That's incredible.
Yeah, that's remarkable. It just tells you that the powers that be knew who they wanted on their call. Yeah. If you had him on the call, you knew something special was going to happen. He was going to be able to narrate moments perfectly, set it in place with how historic of events that you were seeing on the field. And there's a reason for that. He was the best at that. He was the absolute best. I think about
And it's crazy. I'm sorry to interrupt. He was synonymous with a team, and yet every other team out there was perfectly fine with him calling their games.
Sure. Well, that's because he was not only the voice of the Dodgers, he was the voice of baseball. And we've had so many great ones in this industry, and I've been privileged to meet and have a relationship with so many of them. But he's at the very top. He's the kind of guy, when he walked in the room, you're going to be freaking out if your shirt tail was untucked or you weren't sitting straight up. He demanded that kind of authority. It's like, here's Vin Scully. But you're right. And I think about the perfect moments that he had in radio booths. I've gone back and listened to Game 7 of the 1965 World Series, Dodgers and Twins. Sandy Koufax went the distance. And getting to hear Scully and Ray Scott call the game. And it was just absolutely poetic. And I think you'd say the same thing about every World Series. I think about the 1955 World Series and what that meant to the people in Brooklyn. That's the only World Series that the Dodgers won in Brooklyn. And Scully said he made the call and he didn't say anything else because he felt like if he did, he'd start to weep. That's what it meant to those people there in Brooklyn. Take that all the way up into the 1988 World Series, which I consider to be the greatest moment in broadcasting history, at least in our game, Game 1 of the Kirk Gibson home run. You could not come up with a more perfect reaction and narration to that moment than what Vin did. He called the play. Everything that happened leading up to that was a perfect lead up to what we're about to see. And then Kirk Gibson hits the home run. And then after, I want to say, 68 seconds of silence, he drops the most perfect line that you can possibly imagine with, in a year that has been so improbable, the impossible has happened. And when you take that narration and match it with what you just saw, when you think of the 88 World Series, exactly.
I mean, you said it and the chill bumps popped up.
Right. It's so perfect. And it's as if, I don't know, it was such a moment of pure poetic mastery, I feel. And when you think about the 88 World Series, that was just Game 1, Richard. I mean, there were still 4 games left after that as the Dodgers won in 5. But that was the moment. The series was over right there, and he perfectly nailed it. I think about his call of Hank Aaron's home run in Atlanta when he passed Babe Ruth. Oh, what an incredible job of not only capturing the moment, but at the same time, simultaneously capturing what that meant in our country and in the world. It's fascinating to see his scope of that. I think most anybody else's scope of watching that would have been so much more narrow, but he had the ability to widen the scope and really put it into perspective what it truly meant in the sense of history that we were watching for Hank Aaron. Just remarkable. And I think anyone who does this from here on out, whomever is the greatest from here on out, will always be second because no one's ever going to top what Vin did in his career.
Well, and last thing, and I'll let you go here. I appreciate so much your time. Nobody can ever replicate, but I think everybody that works in the broadcast industry can learn from the way Vin Scully approached his craft. Like you can't try to be Vin Scully because you will fail miserably, but there are things you can take from the way he worked that help everybody.
That's 100% accurate. When I tell young broadcasters, you can't try to mimic someone else.
Yeah.
You have to be you, but that doesn't mean that you can't learn different things from other broadcasters. And while there's so many things to take and learn from, pick and choose, there are lots of things you can learn from Ben in his career. I think one quote that he borrowed from someone else that I read when I was in the minor leagues, it's something that I've never forgotten. Somebody asked about his longevity in the game, and he borrowed a quote from Sir Laurence Olivier. And he said, the humility to prepare and the conviction to pull it off. And what he meant by that is no matter what you've accomplished, no matter how long you've been around, you still have to have the humility to prepare for that night's game. You can't get lazy. And when you find ways where you can be creative and you can bring something to the table that no other broadcaster is going to bring, you have to have the courage to deliver that. Even if it sounds like you're kind of going out on a limb. What we do, yes, we're there to inform our audience, but we're also there to entertain our audience. This is a form of showbiz. And I think that we have to find creative ways as broadcasters to entertain the eyes, the ears of our viewers and our listeners. And you have to have the conviction to bring forth what you discovered while you were preparing. And I think that's a big part of it. And I've always applied that so many times. I have that on a picture on my phone, that quote, and look at it often. And it often inspires me. And I think there are lots of things that we can be inspired by by viewing the career of a Vin Scully, of a John Miller, of a Red Barber, of a Mel Allen. The list goes on and on. And so many different avenues you can choose from when it comes to young broadcaster and where you can learn from and pick and choose your spots.
Ben, you're the best. Thanks for your time.